Hi guys, today we're going to look at exponents. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with the vocabulary and what we call each part of the number that we're looking at today. So we call this 4 to the third power. So this big 4 at the bottom, we call that the base. What the base does is that basically tells us the number that we're going to be multiplied repeatedly. The little top number that's raised, it's really tiny on above the 4, we call that the exponent. And that number tells us how many times we're going to multiply the base. So in this case, we're going to take the base of 4 and we're going to multiply the 4 together 3 times. 4 times 4 times 4. So what do exponents really show? Exponents show repeated multiplication. So instead of saying 4 times 4 times 4, it's just a simple shorthand way to write numbers. Exponents represent how many times the base is multiplied by the exponent. So if we take a look further down on this problem, we have our power, 4 to the third power. So we know this is our base. We're going to multiply the base 3 times. 4 times 4 times 4. These 4s are known as factors. When you multiply numbers together, that should be a review vocabulary term. And when we actually multiply 4 times 4 times 4, we get an answer of 64. So we can call these different names. 4 to the third power is known as exponential form. There's an exponent in it, and if you notice in the word exponential, you can see the word exponent. So if you're asked to put something in exponential form, you're asked to use exponents in your answer. Then the next form is called expanded form. You can see that we took 4 to the third power and we wrote out what the real problem is. It's 4 times 4 times 4. So nice and long, 4 to the third power, 4 times 4 times 4 is known as expanded form, also known as factored form. Then finally, when you take 4 to the third power and you actually solve it and come up with an answer, it's known as standard form 64 in this case. And then again, in words, what do we call this? We usually say the first number out loud, 4 to the third, and we use the word power. So we can have words like 4 to the third power, 4 to the second power, 4 to the 8th power. So whatever the number is, the bottom number you say first, the base you say first, and then you use the exponent, but you use a power. We don't say to the third exponent, we say to the third power. So making sure that you are using the correct vocabulary when you're using these words is going to be important. Let's move on to the next page. So there is something called powers with exponents of 2, like 5 to the second power. We read those a little bit differently. We can actually say, and some of you, I've heard you use this phrase, but you have used the phrase squared, 5 squared. So where did the word squared come from? Why? Well, if you take a look down here at our picture, I put 5 squares going across and 5 squares going up and down, because 5 squared means 5 times 5. So if you take the length and you multiply it times the width, we also know this as finding the area, we know that this would make up 25 little squares. If you wanted to count, you'd find the 25. So why is 5 squared called square? Well, what does it make? It makes a square. So the answer, 25, is known as a perfect square. If you were to line up all of those little squares, they always make a perfect square. So when you look at the bottom of this page, you'll have an opportunity to see what all the perfect squares are from 1 to 10. 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, and get familiar with those numbers, and that if you ever had that many little squares, they would actually make one perfect square. All right, the other part is powers with an exponent of 3, like 5 to the third power. We can read that as 5 cubed. And for the exact same reason, 5 to the third power means 5 times 5 times 5. Standard form is 125 would be the answer. If I was to draw that out and made those all into little cubes, it would actually make a 5 times 5 times 5. We also kind of know that as we've been learning this so far this year, using a lot with volume. That's the formula for volume. And you might have heard us use things like centimeters cubed or inches cubed. It's because these make that cube symbol. The 3 is used after the inches, the centimeters, the feet, and that's kind of the visual it makes, so that's why we can use that term. So the answer 125 is how many cubes it would make to make that actual shape. So 125 is known as a perfect cube. Now on the bottom of this page, you will have an opportunity to see all the perfect squares and perfect cubes from 1 to 10. Go ahead and pause the video at this time, and when you are done, show your teacher, complete this, show your teacher, and then you can move on to the next section of this video. All right, moving right along. Now that you learned a little about perfect squares and perfect cubes, we're going to look at how do we write expanded form, the big long factor problem, into an exponent. So our problem we're going to look at right now is 6 times 6 times 6 times 6. So what's the factor? What are we multiplying together? The factor is 6. That is also known as going to be our base in our exponent. The factor is multiplied. How many times are we multiplying that 6 together? Well, there are 4 of those 6's, so we're going to multiply it together 4 times. So that exponent is going to be 4 when we write out our problem. So 6 times 6 times 6 times 6, written out in exponential form, is 6 to the 4th power. And that's how you write it. All right, you can pause the video at this time, pretty simple, and you're going to have an opportunity to try a few problems on your own. When you are done, get them looked over by your teacher before you move on to the next section. Okay, the last section is how do we write standard form of each exponent? How do we get to the answer? So we're going to use this part to explore our vocabulary, explore the different formats to get to that standard form. So you're going to start off with the power that's going to be given to you. 5 to the 2nd power. We also know now that it's called 5 squared. And so identify the base first. Base is the large number, which is 5. What's the exponent? 2. It's a little raised number. So what does that mean? You take the base 5 and you're going to multiply it together by itself twice. 5 times 5. Okay, put that in a calculator or use a multiplication table. 5 times 5, your final answer is 25. All right, you can pause here and you can probably complete all the way up through 10 to the 5th power. Have your teacher check it over and then you can check. Come back and we'll take a look at decimals real quickly. All right, the decimal, 0.2 to the 4th power. So we would write our base is 0.2. Our exponent is 4. So what does that mean? That means that we take 0.2 and we multiply it together by itself 4 times. 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2. Probably put some spaces in there so it kind of looks a little bit better. There you go. And then I got technology on my side so I can shrink it down and fit it in there. So that's what it means, 0.2 4 times. So now's really an important time to use your calculator to help you. And put 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2 times 0.2, say that 10 times fast, in your calculator. And if you want to try it real quickly, pause the video. Otherwise, and here is the answer. The answer is 0.0016. So this is a really good example of why we use exponents. We usually write exponents because it helps. It's a shorthand version of writing numbers, especially when we're dealing with really small numbers or really large numbers. So we don't have to write out these huge numbers like 0.0016, but believe me, they get a lot longer sometimes. Exponents saves us a little time with not having to write out huge numbers or really tiny numbers. So you should be able to do the next 2 decimals. If you want to stop here and finish those up, go ahead, show your teacher, and then we'll move on to the fractions. Okay, the fraction. This one I'm going to move to the board, so you're not going to see me. I apologize, but I'm having a difficult time getting the equation part to work on the smartboard. So I'm going to go. Hopefully you can still hear me. But the base is 1/2. So I'm going to write 1/2 on the board for my base. My power is, or my exponent is 3. So that means my base is going to be multiplied by itself 3 times. 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. And now according to multiplication with fractions, we multiply all the numerators. So we're going to do 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1. And then we're going to go 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. And so there is my answer for my fraction standard form. The answer is 1/8. And that's all to it. That's all to it. So go ahead, finish this up, show your teacher, and you are all good to go.